We can observe people and just hypothesize in our minds and then look for evidence that confirms our ideas. We can look to literature and philosophy for answers to why people do what they do. But science provides us with a set of procedures or steps, and in many ways, it's a sort of framework that we can use in order to answer those questions about why people are doing what they're doing. Why is someone depressed? How can we help that person become less depressed? Those are very important aspects. I see a question. Can we please chat so that participants can use that if needed? I can see the chat. I don't think I have the ability to. I don't have the ability at this point to allow the chat to go elsewhere, I don't believe. I'm looking at my options. I will try everyone. We'll see if that works. I don't know if that allows you to see everyone's or not. Someone can try chatting just to check. Okay, I see that it's working. Great. Now, the steps that we go through in science, first we observe the world around us, the people around us that we're interested in studying and understanding. Then after we observe long enough, we come up with some questions that we might want to answer. And we arrive at some sort of prediction for why someone is behaving the way they are. We reframe that prediction into a testable hypothesis, something that we can objectively test rather than just find pieces of evidence that confirm our ideas or not. And then we design a study so that we can examine the data to find out if our hypothesis is upheld or affirmed. And we collect the data, analyze it, and share the results. And in a real general way, that's the approach that we take in science. And this is true whether we're studying people, plants, rocks, whatever the aspect of science is, we use those same kinds of methods. Now, when I was learning psychology, I had a professor who went about explaining science in this way. He said that people have questions, and we want answers to those questions. The most basic question is, what is happening? What is going on? And in order to answer that question, the goal underlying it is to describe the phenomenon. And in science, we describe things by measuring them. That's our primary way of describing things, is by measurement in science. And so we might measure a person's personality, their intelligence, the presence of mental illness, depression, or schizophrenia. We have ways of measuring all these different kinds of things. After we deal with that first level of science, next we want to answer a more interesting kind of question, like when is something going to occur, or where is this going to happen? In this sense, what we're really trying to do is to predict the phenomenon. We're trying to predict who is going to be depressed, who is going to be high in IQ or lower in IQ. We're trying to understand, we're trying to predict how other variables relate to each other. And in science, the way that we do this is through statistical methods called correlation and regression. And I think it's always worth reminding ourselves that correlation, the word correlation, represents a joint relationship. We're looking at the relationship between two or more variables. And that allows us to use one variable to make a prediction of another variable. And that's a more interesting part of science, but it doesn't really get us to what we're really most interested in. And that is, we want to know why things happen or how they happen. So, for example, we want to know, why is someone hearing voices that no one else can hear? Why is someone depressed? Why is someone contemplating suicide? These are really important questions. And the goal in addressing those questions is to explain the phenomenon or to control it. We want to understand why someone is experiencing the mental illness, or why they're happy. It doesn't have to always be a negative quality that we're trying to understand. Now, the method we use in order to do that is experimentation. And that allows us to make those kinds of judgments, that level of understanding. I want to point out that measurement really is the foundation of research. It really is the... It really is the foundation of our research, and it's critical to each aspect that we examine of what we're studying. We can't predict unless we have reliable measurements. We can't explain or control unless we have reliable measurements. Now, in terms of where we might use these different kinds of methods, that first level of science is really useful when we're studying something that's new, a new phenomenon, or maybe it's just new to us. And when we do that, we're laying out the foundation for further understanding. For example, I have a friend who is a botanist. He studies plants. And what he does is go to the forest and search the forest for varieties of plants and where they grow. Really what he's doing is measuring. He's counting the leaves. He's looking to see how tall the plant is, how well it's growing, what kinds of soil it's in. All of that is really about that first level of science. He's measuring in order to better describe the plant. And his measurements lead to the ability to predict where the plant will grow. So a similar kind of thing happens in psychology. We describe a disorder. We describe the kinds of symptoms a person is experiencing. We then move on to describing a relationship when we can, where we can better understand where the person might be, what kinds of conditions result in a condition. When we can't, we also use correlation and regression when we can't really do an experiment. So, for example, much of what I study is dealing with religious belief. And I can't manipulate someone's religious belief. That wouldn't be ethical. So many times what I do is I use some variables to predict other variables. I can't really experiment ethically, so I use correlation. Now, ultimately, what we want to do is understand what's going on. And to do that, we need to do an experiment. That is what allows us to demonstrate cause-effect relationships, that one thing is causing a change in another thing. And that's what we would call the gold standard in research. That's what we really are most interested in accomplishing. So if we start at that foundation, we need to really consider how we're measuring. Because measurement really is foundational to science. That's what all the more sophisticated procedures rely on. They have to have good measurements. Now, in order to do that, we need to think about what exactly we want to learn or how we conceptualize the phenomenon. And that is going to help us to arrive at the measurement that is most beneficial. Many times we use questionnaire scales. We've developed thousands and thousands of different questionnaires that allow us to measure different mental ideas, constructs, we would call them. So if we're interested in depression or happiness or neuroticism, there are questionnaires that allow us to measure those things. And they can be really useful. Ultimately, though, I think our main goal is to actually measure behavior. We want to have a way for the individual to demonstrate, physically, observably demonstrate a behavior or an outcome. That's going to be the most effective way for us to show a cause-effect relationship. And it's not always easy to do. To arrive at a behavioral observation requires some very... Someone is unmuted.
Yeah? So sorry, Michael. Can you give me the command to put people on mute? Because suddenly they enter.
I can't share it. I'm sorry.
Can you kindly give me that command so I can put them on mute, because I know it's very disturbing for you and affects the pace of your session. I'm very, very apologize for my part.
Unfortunately, I thought everyone was on mute, and it's apparently they're not. And
it's good.
I'm not able to change that.
It's good for me, but it's my luck now. I can talk with you directly. That's my luck. So if you could give me that right to mute people off. If it's possible.
I don't see how to do that. I'm sorry.
But sorry for my part. Also, I'll try to remind people it's a session. Sorry.
Thank you. I'm looking at my options and I don't see any options. Oh, sorry about that. So we were talking about measurement. Now, when we make a measurement, we need to do what we can to make sure that it's consistent or reliable, and that it is actually measuring what we expect it to measure, which is what we would call validity. Those two qualities are very important. Reliability is the first of those. The basic the basis for validity is reliability. If we can't have a consistent quality measurement, then anything else is rather meaningless. Now, we use those techniques when we're involved in research that in any research, but when it comes to experimentation, that's where we can demonstrate cause and effect relationships. The measurement only describes the correlation, describes a relationship. Experimentation allows for a cause-effect relationship. And one of the challenges that we have is deciding on the right kind of study. If we look at a basic experiment, we'll have a group of people, and we randomly assign them to a control group or to an experimental group. That random assignment is key, because without that, we can't really determine why any difference that we see is there. If we assign all the males to one group, all the females to another group, and then we find a difference, it might be because males and females are different, or it might be because the treatment that we gave is causing the effect. So random assignment is critical to an effective experiment. Often we'll have a pretest where we measure the quality that we're interested in, and then our experimental group receives a treatment, and then we measure both groups again. And if there's a difference between the groups after the experimental group has received the treatment, then we conclude that there is an effect for the treatment, that the treatment had some sort of impact on the measurement. So as a basic example, let's suppose we're interested in happiness, and we have a group of people. We randomly assign some to the control group and some to the experimental group, and we then measure them to see how happy they are. At that point in time, they should be equal. They should be equal in happiness. Then we give some a treatment, and that treatment might be something like instructions to write in a journal each week. Write in a journal 5 things that they're grateful for. And they do that for 4 weeks. At the end of those 4 weeks, we then measure their happiness levels again. The control group, they didn't get the treatment, so they should be at the same level. But the experimental group, who increased their happiness, or who received the treatment, should be expected to increase their happiness level. So that makes a big difference in determining cause and effect relationships. Now, there are many, many different kinds of experimental designs. And there are a series of questions that we have to consider as we go through those different designs. I thought I saw a hand raise and wondered if there was a question, but now I don't see it. And the way my screen is, it's hard to tell. Hard to tell if there's a question. So I'll just pause here for a moment and see if anyone needs to type a question into the chat.
I think so, Michael. You've explained things so beautifully that it's. I'm teaching research nowadays to both my graduate and my master's and my MPhil students, and everything is sort of a revision course for all of us. Okay. And I would like to have a session of learning how to keep this soft melody tone in your voice. You know, the way you speak has a very. I don't have the right word. Like a mesmeric sound you have, So things, the way you are speaking is a very soft tone. I need a direct session with you to learn the skill. It's really great.
Oh, that's kind of you to say.
That's why nobody has any questions, because everything is being taught in a very easy manner.
Well, I think
so. Everybody's enjoying the session.
Well, thank you. So some of the questions that we need to think about when we design a study is how many times we're going to measure. In some situations, it might make sense for us to measure just once. And in other situations, we might measure 2, 3, or more times. Those kinds of questions really come down to the unique situation that you are, the unique situation that you're dealing with. I see now a question that someone messaged me about a new phenomenon. How can you measure something that's new? That's really a difficult question. It depends on what we're studying. But in general, if, goodness sakes, that is really a difficult question. If it's a new phenomenon, then it's probably best for you and another person to talk about that phenomenon and to come up with either behaviors that indicate what the phenomenon is, its presence or its absence, or if it's something more like a personality variable, then it's probably best to get with a partner who's interested in studying this also, and to come up with questions that you could ask on a questionnaire that would indicate that phenomenon's presence or absence, or perhaps how deeply embedded it is in the person. I hope that helps. That it's a hard question because it really depends so much on the details. In the US, we have a saying, "The devil is in the details." That's a good example of it. It really depends on just exactly what you're studying and how it might best be, in order to know how it might best be measured. When we do measure something, it's important to consider, if you measure it more than once, that it's possible that they may become tired of measuring, or they may become practiced at it and measure. By measuring it multiple times, they may develop a sense of practice and become better at it. So you don't want to measure things more than you need to. Another question that I'm sure you're familiar with is, how many variables are you going to consider in predicting or manipulating your construct that you're interested in? If you're just measuring one or manipulating one, then you would use a t-test or an analysis of variance. If it's more than one, then you would use a factorial analysis of variance, or perhaps multiple regression if it's a correlational design. If you're studying something like I often study, where the construct is not something that you can manipulate, but people have it in different quantities, like religious belief. Some people believe a lot, some people not at all, some in the middle. In a situation like that, if you're doing an experiment, then you would use what's known as a quasi-experiment, because the random assignment isn't really possible, but you still have groups of these. Still have different groups that you're trying to compare. And I see a question that reminds me, I neglected to turn on the recording function. I'm sorry about that. I can go through this and try recording again, if that would help. I will do that. After I finish this, I will try to repeat myself. It won't be exactly the same, but it might be helpful. I meant to click that button, but I got distracted somewhere along the way.
There's a big please. There's a please with the PLEASSEEEE. So people are saying the big please for you.
Yeah, I'll record it again and make it available to you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Now, a good resource that's free is this this link, opentext.wsu. I will send that to you as well. It's a good free reference book that deals with experimental design kinds of questions. It's probably a repeat of what Dr. Khan is already giving you. I'm sure that the things that she is teaching you are the same as in this book, but it's very helpful. So those are, excuse me. So those are some aspects of the research design. Let's move now to ethics. And I see a question about informed consent, and that's one of the things that I wanted to talk with you about. Now, different psychological organizations have different ethical codes, but they have a lot of things in common. In the United States, the American Psychological Association, its ethical code has 5 different features that it emphasizes. One is the long way of saying it is beneficence and non-maleficence. It really boils down to just don't hurt people, don't harm people. Fidelity and responsibility, that can be summarized as trust. You want to build trust with the people that you're working with. Integrity, which lends itself to honesty, truthfulness, accuracy. That's important in research. Justice or equal treatment to all people is a 4th concept that's important to ethics. And then respect for people's rights and dignity. Everyone is worthwhile. Everyone has meaning and is valuable. Those 5 ethical principles are the American Psychological Association's. I want to point out, though, that they're really similar to the Universal Declaration of Ethical Principles for Psychologists by the International Association of Applied Psychology. That's a very useful code that psychologists all over the world should uphold. Now, those are the abstract principles. How do we actually engage in people every day? Well, how we treat people ethically is informed by those principles. And one of them is informed consent. And the question that was, the question that came to me a moment ago is, are there situations in research where we can compromise on informed consent? And that's a really difficult one. That's the sort of question that is really going to benefit from your research ethics board's review. Now, my understanding is that in Pakistan, the Board of Advanced Studies and Research functions in the same sort of way as the Institutional Review Board does in the United States. When you create a research proposal, you describe what you're going to do, and then the ethics board, the Board of Advanced Studies or the Institutional Review Board, they review those procedures to see that you're treating people ethically, that you're not harming them, and so forth. Informed consent is a really critical piece of that, and it's rare that a person gets approval to do a study that does not involve informed consent, but it can happen. Most often it happens if it's a public observation. So perhaps you are just watching people as they interact with each other on the street or in an auditorium or something like that, where they're in a public setting and there's no expectation of privacy. In a situation like that, it might be possible to get approval to do research without the informed consent. But if you're measuring them in some more interactive way, you probably need to have their consent. That's especially true if they're children or otherwise unable to reasonably give an informed decision about their participation. So that would be my answer to that question. We want to treat people in a way that doesn't give them pain or discomfort, or at least not intense pain or discomfort. If they feel discomfort, it should be temporary. When we're finished, we should increase their mood or elevate their happiness, however you would like to say it, and alleviate whatever discomfort they might have felt. We need to give people the opportunity to discontinue their participation. If someone decides they no longer want to be in the study, well, that's their prerogative. They should be able to leave. That's part of treating people with dignity. We shouldn't deceive people. We shouldn't use deception unless we really truly need to. As an example, a student and I did a study a few years ago. Well, I guess now it's 15 years ago. And we wanted to measure their honesty. In this study, what we did is we brought people into a lab one at a time. We brought them in and told them that we were interested in people's ability to see an image on a piece of paper and then to interact with that image with their eyes closed. So we had on a sheet of paper a series of circles, some small, some large, and we asked them to study where those circles are on the paper for 1 minute. At the end of that minute, they had their pencil, and we asked them to make a dot in the center of each of those circles. And we told them that, well, they would do this without looking. They would put their hand in front of their eyes and poke their pencil in the center of each circle, and then we would come back and see how they did. So they were alone while they were doing this, and we told them that the average college student could accurately find the center of each circle 13 times. And there were, I think, 17 or 18 circles. So they got most of the circles, we told them. Now, that was a lie. We made that up. We were using deception because what we were really interested in was honesty. Before they did this task, we exposed them to anagrams. These are word puzzles where the letters that form a word are mixed up. And the person had to unscramble the letters in order to determine what the word was. Some of those words had to do with religion, and others had to do with sports. We were interested in seeing if people are exposed to words that deal with religion, would they be less likely to cheat? So we told people most students can do 13 correct, find 13 correct circles. And that was much higher than the average. It was more like 7. And we gave some people an exposure to religion and others not. And what we found was that people who were exposed to the religion words had a lower number of accurate, a lower accuracy in the pencil task. It's a simple experiment, but what we were really interested in is, does religion help people be honest? And we couldn't just ask people, how religious are you? How honest are you? That's just not going to work. Most people are going to say, oh, yes, I'm honest. We wanted to find a method that would allow them to demonstrate their honesty. So after we did this, then we had to give them a debriefing. We explained why we were deceptive and make sure that any questions they had were answered. That's an important piece of treating people ethically in research. So again, the informed consent question is a good one. Most of the time we do need informed consent. It's a rather rare situation where we don't. But these aspects of how we treat people, these are the more common ways that we think about it. I would argue we also need to treat our colleagues and our research assistants well. That's part of being an ethical researcher. We have to recognize our research assistants' safety and well-being. I have a colleague who, when she was in graduate school, had to present people with a really disgusting, disturbing video. I don't know the details of this research project, but it did involve a video that was really objectionable. And so as part of her work, she had to view this 100 times. And she suffered for it. We need to treat our research assistants well. We need to consider their safety, their well-being, and consider how, if a person is being exposed to some negative stimuli, how we can minimize whatever effects there might be from that. That's part of being an ethical researcher. Now, just last week, or earlier this week, I guess, there was an example of this that came up in the news here in the United States. In Wisconsin, the University of Wisconsin, there was a researcher, not in psychology, but still he's doing scientific research, who had what's called a toxic lab. For over 20 years, this man screamed at his students, he berated them, he treated them terribly, and it went on for 20 years. That is not acceptable. And it happened just this week that this came out. I don't know if you can read how large your screen is, or maybe you're listening on the phone. The caption under the photo is, "It's concerning that faculty heard Saeed screaming at students down the hall and did nothing about it," fourth-year graduate student Brian Rubio Perez said. "It's also concerning that it went on for nearly 25 years and it was only reported in writing once." That's obviously not acceptable. An ethical researcher, an ethical person is not going to do that. We need to treat our research assistants well. Now, I would also say that we need to treat science ethically. And the way that we do that is to recognize that ethics isn't limited to our interpersonal interactions with one person and another. It's also relevant to how we treat the body of people, the group of people who do science. And we do that by recognizing the limitations of our research, by being as clear and honest as we can in describing our research. And there are new and useful ways of doing this. One of these is the Center for Open Science. The Center for Open Science is a way where you can, for example, you can pre-register your research so that you, as you're going through the research process and you're developing your predictions, you can register those predictions on the Center for Open Science page, and then you can have it recorded that here's what you expected to find. Then you do the study, you analyze the data, and you see, was I right? Was my prediction upheld? This is an important way so that we can